Welcome to Rainy Day Recess, where we study and discuss Seattle Public Schools. I'm Christy Robertson.
And I'm Jasmine Polito.
Before we get to our regular episode, we need to note that this was recorded before the news came out on Monday, March 17th, from Seattle Schools Superintendent Brent Jones, who announced that he will be leaving the district and that his last day will be September 3rd before school starts in the fall.
Yeah, in his letters to families and staff, Jones said he made this decision, quote, after much reflection, and is announcing now to allow as much time for transition as possible.
An article in the Seattle Times notes that his wife got a job at the University of California, Santa Barbara, so it sounds like they'll be moving to California.
What's he going to be doing for his remaining months, Christy?
He said that he will focus on assisting with the superintendent search, that he'll work with the legislature on funding and presenting next year's budget and the strategic plan for the next school year and beyond.
That's still a lot to do in the meantime.
Superintendent Jones was appointed when Denise Juneau resigned in 2021 after 3 years on the job.
Yeah, I actually read that Juneau resigned 2 months before the end of her contract and that she left after fallout from remote learning.
Or something.
According to official sources, that is why she left.
All right. 3 years for Juneau, 4 years for Dr. Jones. There's a spreadsheet of all the superintendents back since 1881.
Yeah. And it looked like in the last 20 years, the average is a little over 3 years. Jones is a little bit over 4 years if you include his interim term.
According to an Education Week article in 2018, before the pandemic, urban superintendents in general served an average of 6 years.
Anyway, at that time, what happened was Superintendent Jones was handpicked, right, as successor?
Yeah.
But he started off as interim, and he wasn't supposed to be the permanent.
No, the agreement was that he would not be applying for the permanent job, that he would just be like a caretaker interim superintendent. But that isn't what ended up happening, obviously. He ended up being given the job.
But it doesn't look like we're going to have interim appointment. So hopefully they'll be doing a real superintendent search with criteria and hopefully community engagement.
Hopefully. Yeah, I watched the process in a neighboring district where they brought the top 2 or the top 3 to actually have community engagement events and answer questions. Let's move on to our regular rundown episode. It was recorded at a time when we did not know this information.
Thanks for joining us for our rundown, where we'll be unpacking the latest developments affecting our school communities, including a breakdown of the March 12th school board meeting, updates on the Highly Capable program, and several other important developments in our district.
A quick reminder that transcripts are available at rainydayrecess.org if you prefer to read or if you'd like to translate to another language.
Today, we need to start with some heartbreaking news. On March 6th, a 12-year-old student at Washington Middle School was tragically killed when an unoccupied vehicle rolled down a hill and struck her on the sidewalk as she was walking to recess.
Her name was Arsema Bareku, a 6th grade student at the school, where her sister is also an 8th grader. It sounds like the driver of an SUV failed to put the vehicle in park before getting out, and it rolled 75 yards downhill.
The student that was struck was from an Ethiopian immigrant family who came to the U.S. in 2019.
What makes it even worse is the way the situation was handled after the fact. There's a really excellent article in the Seattle Times that we'll link to. It sounds like the parents were kept in a room with the police for 2 hours and only told that their daughter had been killed and given no details and not provided an interpreter, not by the school, not by the police. They speak Amharic. And then failed to be contacted by anybody at the school or at the district for a week afterwards until a fuss was made about that. And then they were finally contacted.
Right. Was really hard for me to hear, especially as someone who has parents who are immigrants, and I also have a 12-year-old. So I just feel like this one hit pretty close to home for me.
The March 12th school board meeting, Superintendent Jones and school board president Gina Top did make mention of this incident and also took the opportunity to mention the shooting that happened where 40 bullets were shot into the Bridges and Interagency School at the old Rocks Hill building on February 10th.
But there was also another shooting recently in a similar area.
Yep. The day after the school board meeting, there was another shooting in the park directly next door to the school, Rocks Hill Park, where a 17-year-old was injured. And I don't know whether that was a student of the school. I don't know whether the school went into lockdown. I have not been able to get any answers about that.
But we can link to what information we do have in our show notes.
And then the third thing that Superintendent Jones and President Top mentioned in their statement was a commitment to racial equity, which I think was their answer to the removal of those racial equity websites. They did not mention the sites going away, but said that they're still committed to those same principles.
Yeah, and I saw that they sent out an email that also articulated that statement, but did not acknowledge the websites going down. With that in mind, we can go into the school board meeting.
The school board meeting was jam-packed, as it often is. The main topics were another update on the highly capable program, progress monitoring, report and training, a presentation of what the interim goals are going to be, and strategic planning update.
Let's dig in. We had a lot of students speak for this testimony. I counted 6, and then we had 30 people on the wait list. There were a few people that said they signed up, but was not shown on the list. And I haven't usually seen them stop accepting waitlist signups.
I asked SPS whether they're limiting the slots on the wait lists, but I did not hear back.
So that might be new. I wonder what's happening there.
Yeah. It's a way of saying that this is what I care about, even if they don't get to you on the list.
And people do watch that.
Yeah, people definitely look at that.
Oh, can I mention one more thing?
Yeah.
At the beginning of this meeting, Dr. Rankin put forth what was called a clarifying question, but essentially pointing out, when are we going to have a second school board meeting?
Yeah, she also said that she and Director Briggs had requested that something be put on the agenda and it hadn't been. So that was interesting.
I have a couple of clarifying questions, actually, about agenda setting and work plan. When we adopted the regular board meeting calendar last year to the legally required one regular board meeting a month, it was with the commitment and planning of still having a second board meeting a month, but reserved for work session, study session, other business of the board, and community engagement in a two-way fashion to replace and improve upon one-way public testimony that would have been lost by that second regular board meeting. I would like some clarification on where we are with that. It looks like we only have one regular board meeting a month, and that's all that we're meeting as a board. And a district this size and our need to be transparent and do our business in public, I'm not understanding how we're going to accomplish what's in our work plan in one regular board meeting a week. So I would like some clarity on that. Connected to that, I would like clarity on agenda setting. I requested, along with Director Briggs, to have our work plan discussed as an agenda item, and that was not honored. And we have had, if 2 board directors request something to be on the agenda, it goes on the agenda. The ad hoc governance committee recommended even that any one board director could make a request. If there's a change in practice that I missed, apologies. I'm just confused about how the full board participates in what we do together as a board and how we're going to have time to do that.
And I thought this was like a really interesting interjection, because wasn't the reduction of 2 school board meetings down to 1 school board meeting under her presidency?
Yeah, and it almost felt like the exact same conversation that had happened before when Rankin was president and Director Top was asking, don't we need 2 meetings a month?
I'll also mention that Top has started to make a pattern of interrupting whatever's happening on the agenda. promptly at 5 p.m. to start public testimony so as to not keep the public waiting. Vice President Briggs asked if making their coach wait until after public testimony was appropriate. Here's what Gina Top said.
Yeah, we have a commitment to our community to begin public testimony at 5 p.m.
Director Briggs suggested that they just make the language clear. I know that there have been times before where community was waiting and waiting so that they could give their testimony.
That's right.
Often we start with a mashup of different public testimony, but because there were so many disparate topics, we're going to try to intersperse them as we discuss the topics.
With that being said, there are 2 testimony topics that we wanted to pull out. Do you want to talk about the first one?
Yeah, so these are things that were not actually on the agenda, but they were brought up in testimony. The first one is the LGBTQ plus program coordinator position that is threatened because of what's happening on the federal level. It is funded by a grant from the CDC. So a lot of people came to testify with the concern that this grant might go away. I will post some more information about this in the show notes.
Adriana Mountha, senior from Cleveland STEM High School. What will you do if you can no longer afford your child's therapy? Their counselors, their educators? What if the people who gave you guidance for your child suddenly disappeared because you couldn't fund it anymore?
Kat Barron, a parent of an SPS student, also as a teacher at Maple Elementary on Beacon Hill. Every 2 weeks when I gather with the 30-plus students at Maple's Rainbow Club, I see students who are hungry for a space where they can truly be themselves.
Fox at Cleveland. Half of trans and non-binary kids consider suicide. We are 4 times more likely to consider it than any other kid. That's their job. They're keeping this from happening. We will see more dead kids next year if they are fired.
Also, just to note that the CDC grant has been in place for 30 years.
And the request is for SPS to find another way to fund this position if that grant goes away.
Is it just one person in the entire district?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I have a last-minute add to this story that came in from a listener. A teacher is organizing a postcard campaign for the LGBTQIA plus program coordinator position that we just discussed. And they're hoping to get a bunch of postcards into the district by March 28th. So check the show notes for more information.
And then we can just play a couple clips on testimony regarding option schools.
Ingalls.
So what I'm saying is that closing option schools and playing shenanigans with option school enrollment, you're actively pushing kids out of SPS, which leads to greater inequity and lower enrollment, which in turn leads to lower budget. The option schools already exist. Use them. Open up the waitlist. It's practically free right now.
My name is Janelle Morera. I attend Cleveland High School. Cleveland has capacity for 900 students, but the district is only projecting us to have 660 students, which is about 75% of our capacity. Every year, many students are applying and having to be waitlisted, and they are not being let in even though we have space for more students. Staff members are affected because of this under-enrollment. We are projected to lose 3.5 FTE for our school next year. It will potentially lead to blocking certain humanity classes. That would mean there would be less teachers in overcrowded classrooms. We need to learn history because it is important to learn about our past in order to fix the present and future.
I am Young, a student at Rainier Beach High School Filipino Club and a part of the Save Our Schools campaign as a youth activist. Filipinos in Beach have witnessed and experienced countless issues that deeply affect how they are able to learn in our school. The budget cuts limits resources for queer students and limit where migrant students can learn their history. The only Filipino history class in Cleveland may get cut.
Liz Bergston-Bure.
The more hostile a country becomes, the more support is needed to keep minority individuals safe, especially minority students. The decision of whether or not schools should continue to provide classes that support and validate minority students is crucial.
I see Cleveland, Rainier Beach. It looks like the majority of the student testimony was regarding option schools.
Yeah. For anybody who's interested in the origins of the option school situation that we're in, Kelly LaRue, who is one of our lay historians in the district, pointed me to a meeting from July 5th, 2017. If you have a few hours free, I recommend watching the whole thing. There's so much history in there. It explains so much about so many aspects of what the school board and the district are like right now. We'll probably create a whole episode out of it at some point. But for now, we will include a link to it from Albert Wong's amazing
transcription website, SPS by the numbers.
SPS by the numbers, particularly the part that starts 25 minutes in, is where it is very explicitly explained why they started constraining the wait lists at option schools. And apparently it was started in 2007 because they were saying it was 10 years ago in this 2017 meeting. But here's where the impact on low-income schools was actually spelled out. And the financial impact, too, is spelled out to the dollar in some materials from the board meeting.
It's just interesting to think about decisions that were made and how down the stream those impacts are.
One of the most striking things, though, was just the transparency. I think a lot of the same things are being done now as were being done then, but it's very behind the scenes. And actually, maybe that's part of why the district changed their approach, because when they did spell out the consequences, the board ignored them and went their own way.
Yeah, so speaking of decisions being made and what would their possible ramifications be, let's talk a little bit about highly capable programming. One thing to note is that this particular update was added the day of. And so, I just wonder how much they might have been scrambling to, get their ducks in a row, that they'll have a cohesive presentation considering how blasted they've been in the past, even by us. So, yeah.
For sure. And it was only a month ago that they gave that first presentation that we panned. And this one, it was like night and day.
Yeah, and fun fact, there were applause. So I feel like community really felt seen in this particular presentation.
Yes, I think everybody's well aware of this by now, but the district made the decision to pause the sunsetting of the highly capable cohort. Very big deal. They have been working on this sunsetting for years now, and the sunsetting was supposed to be coupled with moving highly capable programming into the neighborhood schools, and the pressure has just continued to ramp up from communities saying it's just not there. So pause the sunsetting until the programming is available in neighborhood schools. And that is what they did with an email announcement on Tuesday, March 11th. And then with this presentation at the board meeting on Wednesday, March 12th. I don't know about you, Jazz, but I was really impressed by this presentation. I found it to be very clear and answer a lot of the questions that people had asked. Of course, it's all in the follow-through, but kudos to Dr. Torres-Morales on really turning this around.
Yeah, so let's just actually break down what the content of this presentation was. First of all, there was an email sent out to the school community on Tuesday, March 11th that officially announced that they will be continuing the cohort model alongside the neighborhood school model. So a hybrid model for the next 3 years, when originally the cohort model would have closed at the end of this year.
Or rather, they were going to phase it out year by year. So next year, there would have been no second graders. The following year, there would have been no third graders, and so on until it was gone. So another 4 years it would have taken, with the HCC schools getting smaller and smaller. Dr. Torres-Morales.
So our recommendation for the next 3 years is to continue in a hybrid model. Families of students in grades 2 through 5 will be given the choice to decide if they would like their student to receive their services via the cohort model or in their neighborhood school.
The email says, for 2025-26, eligible students in grades 2 to 5 who wish to attend their highly capable cohort pathway may still do so by completing a school choice application before the May 31st, 2025 deadline. So all of the community input has been going into testimony and to letters about pausing the sunsetting of the cohort model was answered. So just a big acknowledgement to all of the community members who really put a lot of heart and soul and brain power into communicating this message.
A bunch of people had signed up to testify about highly capable, and a lot of them converted their testimony into thank you for taking this action.
Hi, I'm Alex Feldman. Just want to thank you, along with a lot of other people, for keeping the highly capable cohort open as an option for students while the district develops a new program for neighborhood schools. I know this will help a lot of kids in our city.
Of course, there are still plenty of problems, as there always have been with the cohort program, and people talked about some of those as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's not at least a 3-year runway in which to address the problems in the neighborhood model. And I think the first thing that it seemed like most people wanted to address was the fact that the neighborhood model does not allow any advancement above grade level, whereas the cohort model can advance the curriculum up to 2 years. And so we'll see how that continues to develop, and of course we'll cover it.
Dr. Torres-Morales was very concrete about what he was promising. He promised that by April 1st that they will deliver to the board an HC plan with details about identification. That's never been a problem. They've always talked about their identification. The thing that's been missing is the description of the services that they're going to offer. But now he's promising an instructional program description, a description of the professional development, a program evaluation and fiscal report. And then he talked about what they would actually measure to determine that the neighborhood schools are effective. Are the kids at level, I'm not sure which level, making a year or more of growth from where they were, and checking in about environment, because another thing they have heard over and over is that kids who are identified often feel ostracized in their neighborhood schools. And Rocky committed to hire a director this spring.
That's right. Yeah.
And set up a series of engagements. So many, many commitments.
Yeah, which I think a lot of people were happy to hear some sort of concrete commitment, though there's not a great track record in general of execution, but I don't want to be too pessimistic. It's just hard when you do all this coverage.
Well, it's nice when there are bullet points that are in English as opposed to educationese.
Yes.
And
true.
Are clearly like, we will know whether he delivers these things or not.
Yes.
They're concrete.
They're not like, what do they call it? Like word salad?
Word salad.
They're not like word salad.
Word salad is a favorite dish of many administrators in Seattle Public Schools.
That's so true.
I think this is the last thing about highly capable. And this ties into some community feedback we got from an SPS parent.
That's right.
In a recent Seattle Times article, Superintendent Jones and Dr. Torres-Morales named Gatewood and Lowell elementary schools as examples of successful neighborhood school models. Our listener said, I would find it so helpful to hear from members of the Gatewood and Lowell communities about what the model actually looks like there, whether the community members agree with the SPS assessment, that it is working well, and what is enabling it to work so well.
Yeah. So if you're a parent, staff member, or student at Gatewood or Lowell, we'd love to hear your perspective on how the neighborhood school highly capable model is working. Please email us at hello@rainydayrecess.org with your experiences.
Huge deal between Tuesday and Wednesday, a giant shift in highly capable.
Huge shift, and definitely wanted to put it a little bit higher in the episode because it was a pretty big deal to see this announced. So let's move to progress monitoring on college and career readiness.
In contrast to Dr. Torres-Morales' beautiful bullet points, I have this slide that I might make the thumbnail for this episode, which is this theory of action slide.
Totally.
If you were making a salad, you wouldn't put this many ingredients in it. This would be a bad salad. There's how many boxes are on this slide? 20 boxes with arrows.
I mean, this is a favorite slide too. They always show it.
They love this slide.
They always show it and they always spend time talking about it, but I don't ever actually know what it means.
No, it's impossible to look at. As soon as you look at it, your eyes go cross-eyed.
There's just a lot of keywords in there and a lot of directionality that evokes the feeling of progression, but it doesn't actually say anything about.
Yes, evokes the feeling of progression. Yes, exactly. And then at the very end is impact, academic goal. SPS graduates succeed in a range of post-secondary pathways of their choosing in Seattle and the world. It's not just the slide. It's that the words that accompany it are just as difficult to understand, in my opinion, where I'll find myself just needing to tune myself back in and try to understand what they're saying.
Yeah.
And now I feel kind of bad because somebody probably put a lot of effort into making that slide, and probably it all made sense in their head. But I definitely would like to encourage people presenting to a broad audience to pay attention to what's understandable in a forum like this.
So let's move to progress monitoring, and it's just like a quick update on the interim goals. Should we just say a sentence about it, or what do you think?
Sure, go for it.
So this progress report was on college and career readiness, focused on the targeted group of Black male teens. And they're looking for the percentage of Black male teens in each cohort who both graduate and also successfully complete at least one advanced course. And so they just went over 2 interim goals for this larger goal. That is, what percentage of 9th graders are earning at least 6 credits, and what percentage of 10th graders are earning at least 12 credits. And just like the update on that is 9th grade Black boys are tracking 2.7% points lower compared to last year's cohort. And then 10th grade Black boys are tracking at 0.3 percentage points up from last year's cohort. An additional data point they threw in was that the improvement that can happen between 10th grade semester 1 and the actual graduation can be quite a big jump. And so they're feeling optimistic.
It's important to note that while 61% of African American male students were on track with credits after the first semester after 10th grade, ultimately 80% of these students did graduate on time. We anticipate that the graduation rate for African American male students in the class of 2026 will also be much higher than the current 59.1%.
So, Jazz. Unfortunately, I'll have to be the Debbie data downer because it seems like all the changes are within the margin of error, so you can't really conclude anything from that. And it also seems like they're not really measuring something that correlates strongly with the outcome that they want. And then I also don't feel like I understand their theory of action. And so I don't necessarily believe that they're going to be able to move things in the right direction, despite the fact that I love the idea of bringing data and evaluating strategies in light of those data. But for me, this isn't it.
Mm-hmm.
A paper that I can also link, the 8 practices of highly successful school boards, dovetails with some of the training that we're going to talk about. One of the key things is that the superintendent needs to convince the school board that they have a plan for making clear, rapid progress on the goals. And if you can't understand what the strategies are, then you can't determine whether they're sufficient. I think there are things that they could do that would be like just a lot more clear-cut and hence more convincing. For example, one would be, we see a really clear correlation between school attendance and school performance and getting kids to graduation, which is true. They have shown this. And so we are going to work really hard specifically on attendance issues, and we will report back about whether we're making progress on our goals. Another one could be high schoolers need 24 credits in order to graduate, which is 4 years of 6 credit days. Anything that gets in the way of any of those credits automatically puts them off track. A lot of districts have gone to 7 period days in high school to give students a lot more wiggle room. Then you have 28 possible credits that you need to squeeze 24 credits out of. So we're going to convert our schools to 7 period days. There's also an audit that came out this year that showed that having more counselors available to kids to help them stay on track with graduation and life and career goals has an incredible impact. So that's a third option that they could bring. We're going to put our budgetary focus on high school counseling for Goal 3. So just a couple of things that I've been thinking about that would be much more straightforward.
I have a feeling that if it's not clearly articulated in the way that you have just exemplified for us now, that they don't actually know which strategies are working. My theory is that when you have word salad, it's because you're covering up the fact that you have nothing.
Yeah, or that you're just doing business as usual and you pulled some of the things onto a slide, which ties very well into the next segment, which was a training on progress monitoring.
Yeah, let's talk about it. I thought this was the more interesting part on progress monitoring.
Absolutely.
This training was essentially for the school board and for the public to watch what a training looks like for the school board on student outcomes focused governance.
AJ Crabill is their coach for student outcomes focused governance. And while I am not a student outcomes focused governance zealot, AJ Crabill clearly has a vision, and it makes so much sense when he talks about it. You can clearly see the ways that if the board were to adhere more closely to what he's talking about, whether or not you like student outcomes focused governance, that the board would be functioning better.
I also really appreciated the clarity and the straightforward manner in which Crabill speaks and is very deliberate in being able to articulate what he means and what he doesn't mean. A quick breakdown of some key points. One was that he outlined the 3 key ingredients for progress monitoring.
Yes, regular reports, a monitoring calendar so that you get a little bit every month and can really dig into that. And the third one, Jess?
Questions that the school board members bring.
And he said a couple times that all 3 kinds of questions, technical, tactical, and strategic, they're all valid questions. It's preferable if technical and tactical questions are answered before, but you can ask them at any time. And that the answers should be shared with everybody.
If you look back on one of our episodes in which we question the way in which questions are admitted or not for a conversation during the school board, essentially they were banning any questions that were technical and tactical and leaving only strategic questions.
Which is particularly problematic because I feel like it's not always a clear case of whether something's strategic or not.
What he said here was that if you're told you can't ask a certain question, that's a misunderstanding.
Yeah, it really points to what things are important to be concerned about when you're trying to do student outcomes focused governance and which things are just watchdogging and quieting people.
Yeah, that sort of leads into the second thing, which was how the purpose is not to have a gotcha moment for the superintendent. And what it's supposed to be about is evaluating the performance of the system and not the individual character of the superintendent. I'll play the quote from it, but basically Crabill has some constructive criticism for the board and how these conversations have played out at school board meetings.
My view of watching your board meetings is that there is a reluctance to have the superintendent really own the entirety of the monitoring conversation for fear that the monitoring conversation may be weaponized and used as an opportunity to beat up on the superintendent. A healthy recipe involves this being a conversation between the board and the superintendent, but that only works when there is a feeling of safety around the conversation. I see that as speaking to a failure of the board to create the optimal conditions for monitoring to be effective.
I loved this too, Jazz.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like there's been this jumping back and forth between being really scared to be critical of the superintendent and so not wanting to push too hard, or like getting very frustrated and pushing really hard on the superintendent. What it sounded like to me, Crabill was saying is it's the system, and the board and the superintendent are all part of the system. You're working together for students, and if something's not working, then you all are trying to figure out what to change to make it work for students.
Yeah, and put a emphasis on creating the conditions of safety to have that conversation, and that was really on the onus of the school board to create for the superintendent and district staff. One thing that Crabill also mentioned was that he had coded a previous school board meeting on progress monitoring and described that iteration of the school board as, quote, extremely verbose. He gave a pretty, I thought, a really accurate summation of how these conversations go.
I know from having previously coded your meetings, you all in the past, but a previous incarnation of the board, you all were definitely extraordinarily verbose. And so trying to get to how do we be just really dialed into what is it we want to ask. So for example, I remember one of the meetings that I coded earlier last year, and what would happen is there'd be a 3-minute statement and then a question and then another 3-minute statement and then 2 more questions. And then the staff would only ask the very last question, and then the board member would get frustrated because they never got an answer to their first question. I don't actually fault the staff for that. That is just poor question asking on the part of the board.
Hersey felt it would be valuable for the board to go back together and see how those meetings went down to get an idea of how to improve moving forward.
Looking back, especially over the past year, given that there's just been so much going on, it feels as though we spent a lot of our time utilizing progress monitoring to express our frustrations with other things. And that, to me, is just like time that we could have used really diving in deep and spending more of our energy and limited time together focused on children, right? I know you haven't looked at a lot of the past board meetings, but I think this will probably be a good opportunity for us as a board to replay the tape and really go into our next monitoring sessions with a more clear-eyed objective focused on students.
Crabill was a total fan of being able to play back the tape and offered to code the next progress monitoring meeting as feedback for them.
That would be a very mature and productive thing, I feel like, for them to do.
I hope they do it. It just seemed really honest and genuine and authentic. I was appreciating Hersey putting that forward as a matter of ownership for the board to take on.
Yeah. Crabill was talking about making a safe space for the staff to come forward. And at the same time, then he spoke about that if a monitoring report comes and it does not show satisfactory growth, and there are not strategies outlined that are sufficiently aggressive to bridge the gap, the monitoring report should be rejected. A safe space and yet an accountable space.
Good point.
Voting on progress monitoring reports is something they have not been doing and would be really interesting to see. They're clearly, some of them, very angry at the superintendent now, but there has never been a point where they've said, your plan isn't good enough, or our plan isn't good enough, we need to come back.
Yeah, and I think the nuance that AJ Crabill was trying to really make clear was that we shouldn't personalize the superintendent. It's about the system, right?
Yeah, very interesting session.
Yeah, really interesting session. Yeah, and he did give some really specific recommendations as far as what to do if they felt that it was going to go off the rails. One is checking to make sure that the intent of their questions actually matches the impact. And another was the board chair or even the facilitator, if it's someone different, being able to recognize when things are going off the rails and just putting a pause.
Frankly, a lot of this falls on the shoulders of the board chair to simply pause questions or conversations that in the board chair's judgment, so this is purely a judgment call, that in the board chair's judgment are not actually contributing to understanding the reality for our students and understanding what are the strategies that are working and not working, what we've learned from it, what we're going to do next. And so when we start to have conversation that looks like it's trying to reflect on the character of the superintendent rather than the performance of the system, our coaching would be that the board chair has an obligation as the role of the chair to pause that, because that is inconsistent with what you all have said that you would do. Monitoring is not a time to offer critiques on the performance of the superintendent as an individual contributor. It is a time to really evaluate the performance of the system as a whole.
Okay, should we move on to the strategic plan?
Superintendent Jones was joined by Eric Ritchie, who is a deputy chief of staff.
New.
And is new. And if you recall, the old strategic plan was called Seattle Excellence. That is the one we talked earlier in the episode about the outcomes for Black boys as a targeted group. And now the district is taking a gap year before going into the new strategic plan. And so This update was really just to talk about what the timeline is between the gap year and the new strategic plan. And it was very broad, but I thought there was a really nice timeline of all the different work streams that happen to make the strategic plan happen. And they're really just trying to get in the practice of providing a monthly update for the strategic plan.
But can you explain to me what a strategic plan is? What actually is it?
So my understanding of the strategic plan is the actual concrete details in which the values are realized within the guardrails.
So how they organize their resources and stuff to accomplish the goals?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're like, okay, now that the board has voted on the goals and guardrails, now we're going to put all of the resources and plans into place to realize those values or outcomes, I guess.
Okay. And they did say they were going to have a task force.
Yeah, so they did say two things. One is that they have an advisory task force that they're going to put together for the strategic plan. And another was that they'll have access to a national database that shows what other districts are spending in particular areas. And they can make adjustments based on if they are spending much higher or lower in certain areas.
They will be doing community engagement from April through November. Okay, so let's jump to some community notes. We released our first interview with the school board candidate, Sarah Clark, and we have another one coming soon with Landon Lebowski. And that is because we are in school board candidate season, which extends from, I guess, March until November. There are a couple school board candidate trainings we want to talk about. One that's passed was hosted by the Southeast Seattle Education Coalition, also known as CSEC. This was a panel discussion called Stepping Up for Schools. It was March 4th at El Centro de la Raza.
Our current District 7 director was there, Brandon Hersey, as one of the panelists. We also had Aaron Garcia, who's a current Highline District school board director, Corey Strozer, who is the current president on the Tacoma School Board, and Stefan Blanford, who was previously a school board director for us in Seattle.
They were all school board directors of color, and they each had some messages to pass along to people who might be considering running. Director Hersey encouraged people to set a timetable and not expect yourself to serve on the school board forever. He said, it will take everything from you. And he also said, it's the hardest job in American politics, but the most important. Aaron Garcia, the Highline School Board Director, said that it was very important to listen to constituents. A couple of the school board directors emphasized not just hearing what the administrators are telling you in the school board meeting, but to actually go visit the schools and talk to people, something that we talk about a lot on this podcast. And then my favorite line maybe of the entire event was him saying, if you have a high need to be liked, don't do this gig.
Yeah, I want to say Aaron is probably at least partially Filipino because he mentioned chismet, which is gossip. Wanting to know. Yeah. So he was saying when you become a school board member, you're not in the know of all the chismet, or you do get some, but it's very filtered. And so that was something that he felt sad about. I'll also talk about Corey, who's the current Tacoma president. He was talking about the importance of seeing what's really happening in schools and trying to basically pop in without telling anyone so that they don't have time to prepare a front for a school board director. He wants to just know what's really going on. And focusing on student needs above all else, which we hope all directors are thinking about. And he said, I don't need permission. I'm here for the babies.
A side note that maybe we can put here somewhere else, but I watched a Edunomics Lab presentation recently where they were saying that they'll ask superintendents, what's the most important thing to prioritize? And they'll say the students universally. That's what all our decisions should be based on. But then if they present a scenario where they say okay, well, it would help the students if we take some resources from staffing and put it over in this other area, the superintendents will be like, oh no, we have to protect our staff. They're like family. And it's easier said than done to make decisions solely based on students.
Yeah, I love that presentation. And then Stefan did talk about whether or not closing schools is the right thing to do, which I thought was interesting. And he also talked about, as a person of color, having to contend with the idea that you're participating in a system that is oppressing people like you. How do you reconcile your role in that?
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people have had the experience of criticizing something from the outside, working hard to get into a position where you can try to do something about it, but then you're complicit as well. Yeah, and Director Hersey also seconded those comments. That's a very heavy piece for directors of color.
Yeah, and just one thing I wanted to mention was there were no women of color on this panel. So I'd really be interested to hear how that particular intersection might also affect what advice you might give to a future school board director.
In that 2017 meeting, Betty Patu was one of the directors. It would be pretty interesting to get her take.
Really interesting, too, because Betty Patu ended up resigning early. Actually, out of the people that I saw that resigned, most of them were women of color. So I'm really curious to hear what is going on in that experience.
One other training that we want to mention is one that is ongoing, which is from the Coalition for Healthy and Equitable Education. They have launched a brand new training series for school board directors. They say their goal is to help candidates prepare not only to run for election, but also to effectively govern at the board level. The initiative focuses on building a strong pipeline of candidates who are informed about educational equity. They have 6 sessions. I believe one of them's passed, but it's fine to join mid-session. And they will have current board directors, a bunch of former board directors, and are working with orgs like Alliance for Education, CSEC, that we mentioned above, Washington Family Engagement, and the National Women's Political Caucus.
We will add that into the show notes if you're interested in those trainings.
Yes, or Google Learning Together School Board Training.
Our state superintendent, Chris Rakedale, did have a March 13th press event.
Yeah, just quickly, look up Rakedale's March 13th press event. He talks about some of the federal changes and the impacts on schools, which are mostly follow the state law. And then he also spoke to the legislature, saying that districts are facing a $1,000 per student funding reduction compared to 5 years ago, and also advocating for increased levy authority and new revenue. It's a very interesting event. I definitely recommend listening to what he has to say.
I haven't watched that yet, so that'll be good. All right, that concludes this rundown episode. You can subscribe and see our show notes at rainydayrecess.org and contact us at hello@rainydayrecess.org.
You can also donate. As little as a cup of coffee once a month really helps us with our software costs. I'm Christy Robertson.
And I'm Jasmine Polito. Thanks to Lester Mayo and the Manzana Movement for our music.
Stay curious, stay cozy, and thanks for listening to Rainy Day Recess.